Imagine for a moment, a typical evening. Your family is gathered together in the living room. The lights are soft, and a gentle glow fills the space. All eyes are fixed on a screen, a window to another world. Perhaps you are watching a dramatic story unfold, a nature documentary, the latest news from across the globe. This box, this screen, has become the heart of the modern home. It brings us laughter, tears, information. It connects us to people and places we may never visit in person. We simply turn it on, and the world comes flooding in. It feels so simple, so effortless, almost like magic. But have you ever paused to wonder how this incredible device came to be? How did this simple box of glass and wires gain such a central place in our lives? It did not simply appear one day, fully formed. Its creation is a story of human ingenuity, countless dreamers, persistent inventors who worked tirelessly in dusty workshops, bright laboratories. It is a story that spans decades, built upon small victories and frustrating failures. The television you watch today is the result of a long and fascinating journey, one that began long before most of us were even born. It is a tale of science, of art, and of society itself. The journey starts not with a clear picture, but with a faint, flickering image. It begins with strange spinning discs, complicated contraptions made of wires, glass tubes. The first pioneers of television were not trying to create an entertainment system for the world. They were simply chasing an idea, a question that obsessed them. Could we send a picture through the air, just as we could send a sound? This question drove them to experiment, to build, and to dream. Their early successes were small and barely noticeable, but they were the crucial first steps on a path that would change the world forever. In this story, we will peel back the layers of time to uncover the untold origin of television. We will see how a simple idea grew into a powerful technology that has shaped our culture, our politics, and our daily routines. We will explore how one invention built upon another, like stones being laid for a great road. This is not just a history of a machine. It is a history of the human imagination and our endless desire to connect with one another. It is a story that helps us understand the world we live in today, a world dominated by a glowing screen that started as a simple, audacious dream. Our journey will be a clear one, following a timeline that starts with the very first sparks of an idea. We will begin in the late 19th century, a time of great invention, electricity, photography. We will meet the early visionaries who first imagined sending moving pictures over a distance. We will discover the simple mechanical devices they built, which could transmit blurry, ghost-like images. These first steps were clumsy and imperfect, but they proved that the impossible might just be possible. They laid the essential groundwork for everything that was to come. From these mechanical beginnings, we will move into the age of electronic television. We will meet the brilliant inventors who cracked the code to sending clear, stable pictures through the air. We will witness the race between individuals and huge corporations, tales of young prodigies working in secret patent battles, first public broadcasts that astonished the world. We will explain in simple terms how this new electronic system worked, why it was such a monumental leap forward from the spinning discs of the past. Next, we will see how television exploded into public life after the Second World War. This is the moment when the television set transformed from a scientific curiosity into a must-have item for every household. We will explore how the first television shows were made, live news reports, scripted dramas, popular variety shows. We will see how the television set changed the layout of our homes and the rhythm of our daily lives. It gathered families together in the evenings, created shared cultural moments for entire nations, changing society in ways its inventors could never have predicted. This remarkable story will reveal surprising facts and introduce you to the forgotten heroes of television's past. You will learn how the technology works and why it matters so deeply. Understanding this history gives us a new perspective on the screens we stare at every day, giant cinema screen, tiny phone in your pocket. It is a story about where we have been and where we might be going next. So let us begin our journey. Let us travel back in time to uncover the incredible, untold story of the magic box in your living room. The story of television does not begin with a screen, but with a question that captured the imagination of 19th century inventors. The world was already being transformed by incredible new technologies. The telegraph could send messages in Morse code across vast distances in an instant. The telephone, invented in 1876, allowed people to hear each other's voices from miles away. Photography was capturing still moments in time, preserving faces and landscapes on paper. With these marvels becoming a reality, a new, more audacious dream began to take shape. If sound could travel through a wire, and if a moment could be frozen in a photograph, could a moving picture also be sent from one place to another? This idea was called seeing at a distance, and it seemed like something from a science fiction story. Yet the building blocks were already there. Scientists understood that light could be converted into electricity. This was a crucial piece of the puzzle. An element called selenium, discovered in 1817, had a peculiar property. Its electrical conductivity changed when exposed to light. More light meant more electricity could pass through it. This discovery sparked a thought in the minds of many inventors. Perhaps an image, which is just a pattern of light and dark, could be translated into an electrical signal. This signal could then be sent through a wire and somehow be turned back into an image at the other end. The challenge was immense. A single photograph was a complex pattern of tones. A moving image was even more complicated, requiring many pictures or frames to be shown in quick succession to create the illusion of movement. How could you possibly capture, transmit, and recreate so much information so quickly? The problem was like trying to describe a detailed painting to someone over the telephone, one tiny dot at a time, and expecting them to repaint it perfectly in real time. It required a method to break the image down into small pieces, send those pieces in an orderly fashion, and then put them all back together again at the receiving end. This process is called scanning. Imagine reading a page in a book. Your eyes move from left to right, line by line, until you have seen every word. The first television pioneers realized they needed a machine that could do the same thing with an image, scan it bit by bit. This concept was the key that would unlock the secret of television. It was a simple idea, but building a device to do it was another matter entirely. It would require mechanical ingenuity, a deep understanding of the new sciences of electricity and optics, and a great deal of persistence. The race was on to invent a device that could turn the dream of seeing at a distance into a working reality. The first major breakthrough came from a young German university student named Paul Nipkow. In 1884, while sitting alone in his room in Berlin, he came up with a brilliantly simple idea. He imagined a spinning disc made of cardboard made of metal with a series of small holes punched into it in a spiral pattern. As the disc rotated, each hole would scan a single line of an image. The first hole would scan the top line. The next hole would scan the line just below it, and so on, until the entire image had been scanned from top to bottom. It was a beautifully elegant solution to the problem of scanning. Nipkow patented his invention, calling it the electric telescope. Nipkow's disc was the heart of what would become known as mechanical television. Here is how it was supposed to work. A bright light would shine on the subject, say a person's face. The light reflecting off the face would pass through the spinning Nipkow disc. Behind the disc, a single light-sensitive selenium cell would capture the light passing through each hole. When a hole passed over a bright part of the image, the selenium cell would generate a strong electrical signal. When it passed over a dark part, it would generate a weak signal. In this way, the entire image was converted, line by line, into a rapidly changing electrical current. To recreate the image, the process would be reversed at the receiving end. The electrical signal would travel through a wire to a light bulb. In front of this bulb was a second Nipkow disc, identical to the first and spinning at exactly the same speed. The incoming electrical signal would control the brightness of the bulb. A strong signal would make it shine brightly, and a weak signal would make it dim. A person looking through the holes of this second spinning disc would see the light from the bulb, and their brain would piece the flickering lines of light back together to form a complete, moving image. Although Paul Nipkow patented his idea, he never actually built a working model of his system. The technology of his time was not advanced enough. Amplifiers, which could make the weak electrical signal stronger, had not yet been invented. The selenium cells were too slow to react to the rapid changes in light. His brilliant concept remained just that, an idea on paper. For decades, his patent gathered dust. However, Nipkow had planted a crucial seed. He had provided the world with the first practical design for a television system. It would be up to a new generation of inventors, years later, to take his spinning disc and make it work. The man who finally brought Paul Nipkow's idea to life was a determined and often struggling Scottish inventor named John Logie Baird. Working in the early 1920s with very little money, Baird built his first television apparatus out of junk he found. His contraption was a messy collection of old tea chests, biscuit tins, scrap lumber lenses he bought from a bicycle shop. He used a Nipkow disc cut from a piece of cardboard. It was a crude and unlikely machine, but Baird poured all his energy and ingenuity into making it work. He was driven by a powerful belief that he could succeed where others had failed. After countless failures and refinements in his small attic workshop in Hastings, England, Baird achieved his first breakthrough. In 1924, he managed to transmit a flickering, shadowy image of a Maltese cross over a distance of a few feet. It was a blurry, indistinct shape, but it was a transmitted image nonetheless. Encouraged, he moved to London to find funding for his experiments. In a small laboratory in the Soho district, he continued to improve his device. He desperately needed to transmit a recognizable human face, which was far more complex than a simple geometric shape because of its subtle tones and shades. The problem was that the light needed for his system was so intense it was too hot for a person to endure. So, for his next crucial test, Baird used a ventriloquist's dummy named Stooky Bill. The dummy's painted face had strong contrast, making it an ideal subject. On October 2, 1925, Baird finally succeeded. The dummy's face appeared on the receiving screen, not as a clear picture, but as a recognizable image with light and shade, blinking and moving. Overjoyed, Baird ran downstairs to find a real human subject. He persuaded a young office boy, William Tainton, to sit in front of the transmitter. Tainton became the first person to have his face televised, appearing as a faint 30-line image on a tiny screen. This success allowed Baird to give the world's first public demonstration of television. On January 26, 1926, he invited about 50 scientists from Britain's Royal Institution to his London lab. The curious audience watched in amazement as images of Stooky Bill and other objects were transmitted from one room to another. The pictures were small, about the size of a postage stamp, and they flickered badly. They were reddish-orange in color, due to the neon lamp used in the receiver, but they were undeniably moving pictures transmitted wirelessly. Baird had proven that television was no longer a dream. It was a reality, however crude and imperfect. Despite Baird's historic achievement, the limitations of mechanical television were obvious to everyone who witnessed it. The images were incredibly small and dim, often requiring viewers to watch through a magnifying lens just to make them out. The level of detail was extremely low. Baird's first images were composed of only 30 lines of information. To put that in perspective, a modern high-definition television displays over 1,000 lines. The result was a picture that was more like a moving silhouette or a ghostly shadow than a clear photograph. You could make out general shapes and movements, but fine details like facial expressions were almost impossible to see. Another major problem was the flicker. The Nipkow disc had to spin very fast to create the illusion of motion, but the mechanical systems of the day struggled to keep up. The speed of the discs at the transmitter and receiver had to be perfectly synchronized, which was very difficult to achieve. If they fell out of sync, the picture would tear apart or dissolve into a meaningless jumble of lines. The constant, rapid scanning also produced a noticeable flicker that was tiring on the eyes. Watching this early television was not a comfortable or relaxing experience. It was a novelty, a marvel of science, but it was far from being a form of entertainment. The mechanical nature of the system was its biggest weakness. The spinning discs were noisy, bulky, and prone to breaking down. To get a brighter or larger image, you needed a bigger disc with larger holes, spinning even faster. This quickly became impractical and dangerous. There was a physical limit to how many lines an image could have and how quickly it could be scanned using a mechanical disc. Inventors tried using mirrors on a spinning drum, other complex devices, but they all ran into the same fundamental constraints. Mechanical television had proven the concept, but it could not deliver the quality needed for mass appeal. Even so, these first sparks mattered immensely. John Logie Baird, Charles Francis Jenkins, other mechanical television pioneers. They had taken television out of the realm of theory and put it into the real world. They showed governments, corporations, and the public that sending moving pictures through the air was possible. Their flickering, ghost-like images inspired a new wave of inventors and engineers. The limitations of the spinning disc made it clear that a new approach was needed. The future of television would not be mechanical. It would have to be electronic. While John Logie Baird was astonishing audiences with his mechanical contraptions, other inventors were pursuing a radically different path. They believed that the future of television lay not in spinning discs, but in the power of electrons. The problem with mechanical systems was clear, limited by moving parts. A spinning disc could only rotate so fast, and its size placed a firm ceiling on image quality. To create a truly clear, bright, detailed picture, television needed to get rid of physical movement. It needed to be faster, more precise, more reliable. It needed to be electronic. Electronic television used invisible beams of electrons instead of a spinning disc. Electrons are tiny particles in atoms and can be guided with electric and magnetic fields. An electronic camera would use an electron beam to scan an image. An electronic receiver would use another beam to draw it on a screen. Because electrons have virtually no mass, they could move almost instantaneously. This would solve flicker, low detail, and synchronization problems of mechanical systems. The concept promised a leap in quality beyond mechanical TV. But building it was far more complex. It required deep physics knowledge and the new field of electronics. Inventors needed two key components that didn't exist yet. First, a camera tube to convert an optical image into electrical signals using an electron scanner. Second, a picture tube, the cathode ray tube, to recreate the image on a phosphorescent screen. Developing them would take years of research, significant funding, and a touch of genius. It was a high-stakes race into uncharted scientific territory. The shift was not just technical, it was philosophical. TV moved from clever mechanics and tinkering to physicists and electronics engineers, away from cogs and wheels toward vacuum tubes and electron guns. This new vision aimed to replace faint, ghostly shadows with pictures as clear and steady as a photograph, yet alive with movement. The stage was set for a new set of pioneers to take over. One of the most important figures in the story of electronic television was a young man from rural Utah named Philo T. Farnsworth. He was a prodigy, a self-taught genius who devoured science magazines as a teenager. While plowing his family's potato fields in 1921, the 14-year-old Farnsworth had a moment of inspiration. As he looked back at the neat, parallel lines he had carved into the earth, he realized that an image could be broken down in the same way. It could be scanned line by line, not with a mechanical disc, but with a beam of electrons sweeping back and forth inside a vacuum tube. It was an idea of breathtaking brilliance, conceived by a boy in the middle of a field. Farnsworth dedicated his life to turning this vision into reality. He convinced investors to give him a small amount of money and set up a modest laboratory in San Francisco. Working in secret with his small team, he began the painstaking process of building the world's first fully electronic television system. His key invention was a camera tube he called the image dissector. This device used a special light-sensitive surface to turn an image into a pattern of electrons. A focused electron beam then scanned this pattern, converting the visual information into an electrical signal, line by line, just as he had imagined in the potato field years earlier. The challenges were enormous. How to create a high vacuum in his glass tubes. How to build a stable electron gun. How to design complex electronic circuits from scratch. For years, his experiments yielded nothing but failure. His investors grew impatient. His funds were constantly on the verge of running out. Yet, Farnsworth persisted, driven by his unwavering belief in his idea. He was in a race against time and against much larger, better-funded corporate research labs that were working on the very same problem. He knew that the first person to create a working electronic system would change the world and, potentially, become very wealthy. On September 7, 1927, in his San Francisco lab, Philo Farnsworth was finally ready for a test. He placed a glass slide with a single straight line drawn on it into his transmitter. In another room, his wife, Elma, and a few colleagues nervously watched the small screen of his receiver. Farnsworth switched on the power. At first, nothing happened. Then, a faint, blurry line appeared on the screen. It was a dim, flickering image, but it was there. They had transmitted a picture with no moving parts. At just 21 years old, the farm boy from Utah had created the world's first electronic television image. It was a quiet moment, witnessed by only a handful of people. But it was a true revolution. While Philo Farnsworth was working tirelessly in his small San Francisco lab, a far more powerful player had entered the race. The Radio Corporation of America, or RCA, was one of the biggest and most powerful technology companies in the world. Its ambitious leader, David Sarnoff, saw the enormous potential of television and was determined that RCA would dominate the new industry. He poured millions of dollars into research and hired Vladimir Zworykin to lead the charge. This set the stage for a classic David and Goliath struggle. Zworykin had been dreaming of electronic television for years. In 1923, at Westinghouse, he filed a patent for a television system that included a cathode ray tube receiver and a special camera tube. That camera tube became the iconoscope, different from Farnsworth's image dissector. The iconoscope could store the light energy of an entire image before scanning it, making it far more sensitive to light. That meant TV cameras no longer needed blinding studio lights. RCA gave Zworykin vast resources to perfect his work. His team refined the iconoscope camera tube and developed a much-improved cathode ray picture tube called the kinescope. The kinescope produced a brighter, sharper image than Farnsworth's early receivers. While Farnsworth had been the first to create a working electronic system, Zworykin and RCA were systematically building a system that was more practical, more powerful, and better suited for a commercial broadcast network. The competition between the two camps was fierce and often bitter. The race ultimately ended up in the courtroom. RCA and Farnsworth became entangled in a long and expensive legal battle over the patents for electronic television. Farnsworth claimed that Zworykin's iconoscope used key principles that he had invented first. RCA, with its army of lawyers, fought back hard. In the end, the U.S. Patent Office made a landmark decision. It examined Farnsworth's high school notebooks, which contained his original drawings from 1922, and ruled in his favor. For the first time in its history, the mighty RCA was forced to pay royalties to an independent inventor. Farnsworth had won the legal battle, but the long fight had taken a heavy toll on him and his company. With the technology rapidly improving throughout the 1930s, television began to move out of the laboratory and into the public eye. In 1936, the British Broadcasting Corporation made a historic decision. It launched the world's first regular, high-definition public television service from Alexandra Palace in London. Initially, the BBC hedged its bets. It broadcast programs using two competing systems on alternate weeks. John Logie Baird's latest 240-line mechanical system, a fully electronic 405-line system developed by Marconi EMI, based on the work of Zworykin and RCA. It was a direct contest between the old and the new. The result of the competition was decisive. The electronic system was vastly superior in every way. Its pictures were brighter, clearer, more stable. After just a few months of trials, the BBC announced in early 1937 that it was abandoning the mechanical system for good. It was the end of an era for Baird and his spinning discs. The future was now officially electronic. The BBC's broadcast created a sensation. A few thousand wealthy Londoners bought television sets, expensive luxury items, to watch the programs. They were treated to a variety of live shows, including singers, comedians, cooking demonstrations, and even broadcasts from the London Zoo. Across the Atlantic, RCA was preparing for its own grand debut. At the 1939 New York World's Fair, David Sarnoff stood before an RCA television camera and announced the official launch of regular broadcasting in the United States. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's opening speech at the fair was televised, making him the first U.S. president to appear on television. Fairgoers crowded around the small wood-paneled television sets that were on display, mesmerized by the moving images. They saw fashion shows, puppet shows, and even a live broadcast of a baseball game between Princeton and Columbia universities. For most people, it was the first time they had ever seen television, and it felt like witnessing magic. These early broadcasts offered a tantalizing glimpse of television's potential. The image quality had improved dramatically from the ghostly flickers of a decade earlier. Screens were larger, and the pictures were clear enough to watch comfortably. However, television was still far from being a mass medium. Sets were prohibitively expensive, costing as much as a new car, and broadcasts were limited to just a few major cities like London and New York. Just as television was poised to take off, world events intervened. The outbreak of the Second World War in 1939 brought nearly all television development and broadcasting to a sudden halt. The factories and engineers were needed for the war effort, and the dream of television for all would have to wait. When the Second World War finally ended in 1945, soldiers returned home. Families were reunited. A great economic boom began. This post-war optimism set the stage for television to explode into the mainstream. The technology, parked during the war, was ready and waiting. Factories had been building radar systems, other military electronics. Now repurposed to build television sets for the public, a new age of consumerism was dawning. Television became the era's most desired product. Demand was astonishing. In 1946, only about 10,000 television sets in the United States. By 1950, that number had skyrocketed to over 6 million families who saved during the war were eager to spend on home entertainment. Mass production drove prices down, making sets affordable. Stores couldn't keep TVs in stock. Crowds gathered outside appliance store windows, watching flickering displays. Programming had to grow up fast to feed this new audience. The experimental era ended. It was time for consistent content. Early TV was broadcast live, immediate and unpredictable. Studios were busy, chaotic places, cameras rolled, hot lights blazed, nervous actors performed. Live formats began to take shape, borrowing from radio variety shows, led by stars like Milton Berle. Children's shows, news reports, simple quiz shows. Network broadcasting rose to meet demand. NBC, CBS, ABC networks linked stations across the country. They produced shows in New York studios and broadcast them nationally at the same time. This created a shared cultural experience like never before. Millions could watch the same show at the same time. Television stopped being a local novelty and became a national force, knitting the country together with common stories and experiences. As television sets began to appear in more and more houses, they had a profound effect on family life and the design of the home itself. The television was not just another appliance like a refrigerator or a washing machine. It was a new focal point for family activity. Before television, families might have gathered around the radio in the evening to listen to their favorite programs. Now, they gathered around the glowing screen of the television. Furniture was rearranged to face the TV, creating a new center of gravity in the living room. The television set became the electronic heart of the home, dictating the rhythm of daily life for millions of families. The evening routine began to revolve around the broadcast schedule. Dinner time was often planned to finish before a popular show started. Children had to finish their homework so they could watch their favorite programs. The phrase "prime time" entered the public vocabulary, referring to the evening hours when the networks aired their most popular shows to the largest audience. Hit programs like I Love Lucy became national obsessions. People would talk about the previous night's episode at work and at school the next day. These shows provided a common ground for conversation and laughter. Television also offered a new kind of family bonding. It brought multiple generations together in one room to share an experience. Grandparents, parents, and children could all sit together and be entertained by the same program. For many, watching television was an event. Families would make popcorn and settle in for an evening of viewing. This shared experience helped to create lasting memories and strengthen family ties, even as it quietly replaced older forms of interaction like reading aloud or playing board games. The television set was more than just a piece of furniture. It was a new member of the family, one that commanded everyone's attention. However, this new addition to the home also sparked concern. Some people worried that television was making people more passive. Instead of talking to each other, family members were now sitting in silence, staring at a screen. Critics worried about the effect of advertising, especially on children, and the impact of violent or simplistic content. The debate over television's influence on society began almost as soon as the sets were turned on. Was this magic box a wonderful new tool for education and connection, or was it a vast wasteland, as one government official famously called it? This question would be debated for decades to come, as television's power and influence continued to grow. Just as black and white television was becoming a staple in every home, engineers were already working on the next great leap forward: color television. The dream of seeing the world on screen in its full natural color was as old as television itself. John Logie Baird had demonstrated a crude form of color television using a spinning disc with colored filters as early as 1928, but creating a practical, electronic color system compatible with existing black and white sets was a far greater technical challenge. It required a way to capture and transmit 3 separate signals, one for red, one for green, one for blue, and then combine them perfectly on the screen. In the early 1950s, 2 competing systems for color television emerged in the United States, leading to a fierce battle. CBS developed a system based on a spinning color wheel, a hybrid mechanical-electronic approach. It produced beautiful color pictures, but it was not compatible with existing black and white TVs. If adopted, millions of sets people had already bought would become obsolete. RCA, led by David Sarnoff, championed a fully electronic, compatible system. A black and white set could still receive the color signal and display it in monochrome, a huge advantage. The government had to decide which system to approve. After much debate and intense lobbying, the US chose RCA's compatible system as the national standard in 1953. The first color broadcasts began almost immediately, with NBC leading the way. Adoption by the public was much slower than the black and white boom. Color sets were extremely expensive, often 3 or 4 times the cost of a black and white model. They were also less reliable and required frequent, costly adjustments by technicians. It was not until the mid-1960s that color television truly began to take off. Prices came down. The technology improved. Networks began broadcasting more primetime shows in color. NBC heavily promoted its all-color lineup with a peacock logo. Seeing shows like Bonanza in beautiful outdoor color or Star Trek with its fantastical costumes in full color was breathtaking for audiences. By the end of the decade, owning a color TV became the new standard, and black and white television began to fade into memory. Much like the silent films of a previous era, television did more than just entertain. It fundamentally changed our relationship with news and world events. Before television, people got their news from newspapers, radio broadcasts, weekly newsreels at the cinema. These mediums could tell you what happened, but television could show you. The nightly news broadcast became a national ritual, with trusted news anchors like Walter Cronkite in the United States becoming some of the most respected figures in the country. When a major event happened anywhere in the world, people turned on their televisions to see it for themselves. The screen became a live window on history as it was being made. This power became incredibly apparent during major political events. In 1960, the first ever televised presidential debates between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon showed the power of the visual medium. People who listened on the radio thought Nixon had won the debate, but those who watched on television saw a young, confident, and handsome Kennedy opposite a pale, sweating, and uncomfortable-looking Nixon. Kennedy's performance on television is widely credited with helping him win the very close election. It was a stark lesson for politicians everywhere. How you looked on television was now just as important as what you said. Television had become an indispensable tool in modern politics. Television also brought the grim realities of war into the living room in a way that had never happened before. During the Vietnam War, television news crews sent back daily reports from the front lines. For the first time, families at home could see the actual sights and sounds of combat while they ate their dinner. This unfiltered, daily exposure to the conflict had a profound impact on public opinion and is believed to have played a significant role in turning the public against the war. The famous saying "the living room war" captured the intimate and disturbing connection that television created between the home front and the battlefield. But television also brought moments of unity and wonder. In July 1969, an estimated 650 million people around the globe, the largest television audience in history at that time, were glued to their screens. They watched in shared astonishment as astronaut Neil Armstrong took his first steps on the surface of the moon. It was a moment of collective human achievement, shared live across continents and oceans. From political debates and wars to coronations and moon landings, television had fulfilled its promise of seeing at a distance in ways its early inventors could have never imagined. It had become a permanent and powerful window on our world. Our journey through the history of television has taken us from dusty workshops to gleaming broadcast studios, from a simple, audacious dream to a technology that has reshaped our world. We began with the first sparks of an idea in the 19th century, the dream of seeing at a distance. We saw how Paul Nipkow's spinning disc, a brilliant concept on paper, laid the mechanical groundwork. Then, we witnessed the tireless determination of John Logie Baird, who, with little more than junk parts and sheer will, coaxed the first ghostly, flickering images into existence. These early mechanical systems were crude and clumsy, but they proved that the impossible was, in fact, possible. They were the crucial first step. The story then turned a page, moving from the mechanical to the electronic age. We met Philo T. Farnsworth, the young farm boy whose vision in a potato field led to the first all-electronic television image, and Vladimir Zworykin, the corporate engineer whose inventions at RCA made television practical for a mass audience. Their work, fueled by rivalry and genius, replaced noisy, spinning discs with silent beams of electrons. This leap transformed television from a scientific curiosity into a powerful medium. The launch of the first public broadcasts in the late 1930s, first in London and then in New York, offered a tantalizing glimpse of a future where moving pictures could be sent into every home. After the pause of the Second World War, that future arrived with astonishing speed. Television sets flooded into living rooms, becoming the new heart of the home and reshaping family life, daily routines, and even the layout of our houses. We saw how the advent of network broadcasting created shared national experiences, and how the arrival of color painted our black and white world with vibrant new life. Television became our window on the world, bringing us presidential debates, the horrors of war, and the transcendent wonder of the first steps on the moon. It changed politics, culture, and our very perception of reality, connecting us to history as it unfolded. Today, the legacy of that journey is all around us. The fundamental principles of scanning an image line by line, developed by those early pioneers, are still at the core of the digital screens we use every day, from giant stadium displays to the smartphones in our pockets. The story of television is a powerful reminder that every piece of technology we take for granted began as a simple human dream. The next time you turn on a screen to watch a story, connect with loved ones, or see news from a distant land, remember the long chain of inventors and dreamers who worked to turn a faint, flickering ghost on a tiny screen into the clear, bright window through which we now see the world.